Well, good morning, everybody. Hopefully everybody's logged in okay, and it's 11 o'clock. We're going to try and get started. So let me do a little introductions. I'm Alan Grieve, environmental sales engineer with Geiger Pump and Equipment. So we're going to start out real quick before I get into too much of anything with one quick thing. So hopefully on your screen, you should be able to see a screen with raise your hand or ask a question. So my name and email are on there. So right now, so you can email me any questions afterwards, but during the presentation, there's a couple things on the right-hand side where you can raise your hand, or you could also, in the text box there, put a question in while I'm going through the presentation. So right now, we're going to see and make sure that the polling function works and that you guys know how to answer the poll questions, because that's going to be important for everybody to answer the poll questions as we're going through. So we're going to post our first poll question, and it's just a simple one on whether or not you can actually answer the question. So we're going to post a poll question. Please go in and answer it. And once you're done with the poll question, then we'll go back and get started with the presentation. It looks like a good portion of you have voted. We're not quite at 100% yet, but if anybody has not answered the poll question yet, please go ahead and answer the poll question. It's just a yes or no whether you can answer it, and then we can get started with the presentation. But again, as always, you can email me questions after the presentation and webinar and the demonstration here, and then we can go from there. So. Are we close to 100% yet? 93%. 93%. All right. Good. So very good. So we'll get started. So welcome. Again, my name is Alan Grieve with Geiger Pump and Equipment. I'm a sales engineer. So today we're going to do installation and maintenance of mechanical seals. It's mainly going through and, doing things for a successful seal installation. So today we're going to do both component seals and cartridge seals. So we're making some assumptions here because we're doing this in a live format and we only have an hour's worth of time. So we're going to move pretty quickly through things, especially some of the things that we're making assumptions on, like that right now this is our training pump, and we want to make sure that normally, you guys would not be installing it in a training pump, or you're probably going to install a seal into a pump that's already been, in use, and you're replacing the seal. So, we're going to make some assumptions along the way. Again, feel free, anybody, as we move through, if you can, post a question. That's probably the easiest thing to do, is to post a question if you have any questions as we're going through this. So. Again, right there there's a chat box, and my producer over here will be able to flag me down and say, hey, I have a question, or if somebody raises their hand, we can do that. Everybody is muted, so you don't have to worry about phones ringing in the background or me getting interrupted. So just feel free to fire off questions if you have them as we go along. So let's talk about a mechanical seal and how it goes in. And this is some of the assumption parts of all this. So mechanical seal is basically sealing your fluid into your pump through you have your shaft from your pump here coming through into your impeller, and we need to seal that. Oftentimes people are using packing, but this is a mechanical seal that has a ceramic face or some kind of mating ring, stationary face, and then a primary ring that's like a carbon face, and that's the rotating ring. So in the picture here, you have your process fluid on the left-hand side. You have an O-ring that's sealing the primary ring to the pump shaft down below. The primary ring is mating up against the mating ring, which that also has a ring. So if we look at these, here's my primary ring or rotating face. Here's my mating ring and seal face, if you can see them okay. And then we also have our seal gland, which is on the back side here. And that all gets installed here onto the pump and seals the fluid into the wet end of the pump and keeps it from leaking out. So the whole idea is that these two seal faces are going to be super close to each other. It's going to allow a little bit of leakage, but that leakage should evaporate almost immediately upon reaching the atmosphere, and that you really shouldn't have any drips coming out of your mechanical seal. So in order to put one of these in, we have to do some checkouts of our pump. Now, like I said, this pump is our training pump, and I know it's in good shape, but I'm going to rattle through here real quick some of the things that you want to check to make sure that we have a good seal installation, whether it's a component seal or a cartridge seal. So, pump inspection. First thing we would want to do is check for shaft run out. And the PowerPoint here in a second will have a picture of what we're talking about here of the inside of this pump. I'm not going to pull it apart yet at this point until we actually get into the seal installation. But shaft run out. The shaft could be bent, it could be moving up and down, it could be from old packing that was maybe in there and you didn't replace the shaft. It could be off center. It could be lots of things. Could be loose bearings. The bearings back in this power frame could be loose, and so that shaft could move. Obviously, that would, since our seal is attached to that shaft, that could cause us problems. So we want to check all that stuff. So the other thing, if there's a shaft sleeve, some pumps have shaft sleeves, some don't. We want to check for poor fitted shaft sleeve. We also want to check to see if maybe this sleeve has cuts or marks in it. Certainly if a lot of pumps have the impeller holds the shaft sleeve in place. So we want to make sure that our impeller is in place properly and tight to make sure that and that's the case with this pump, and we'll get into that when we start installing the seal. We want to make sure that when we put our impeller back on, that shaft sleeve and the impeller are tight up against each other. So here's a picture of us checking the run out. So when this pump is fully disassembled, if this was a real application here where we were out in the field, we would want to put our dial indicator and move it right up here close to the shaft and check for run out. Appropriate run out is a couple thousandths. We wouldn't want that thing moving more than that, otherwise it could affect your seal. Okay, we're going to take a quick pause right here and we're going to throw out another poll question here. If everybody could answer a poll question for us, that would be great. We're going to post it here in 1 second, and we're going to take a pause while I can get a drink of water. So I believe the first poll question is, how many years in the industry? Is that correct? My producer says yes. So yeah. So if you could please answer the question, and it just gives me an idea of the audience out there, since I can't see anybody and nobody can raise hands visually other than virtually through the webinar. It gives me an idea of what you guys are, what your experience is. So, how we doing?
100%.
100%. Awesome. You guys are doing great. So, all right. So we're checking our run out on the shaft in the one direction. So we also want to check axial movement. So we did the radial movement, now we want to check the axial movement back and forth. So again, this pump is a training pump, so I know it's good, so I'm not worrying about that at this point. We're not going to pull it apart to do so, but you would certainly want to check it on your pump if you're replacing the seal in an existing pump. So here's how we check the axial end play. We can mount the dial indicator right here on and have it come in and point right to the shaft. So I'll kind of show that real quick when I'm pulling the pump apart a little bit later to put the seal in, but that's what you want to do, is check all that. So another thing we want to do is a face run out. So in here in the pump is the stuffing box, and there's the seal face in here. So we want to make sure that that's parallel, so and flat all the way around, because our seal gland is going to be mounted up against there, and we want to make sure that that is nice and straight. So important point, if you have excessive run out, you know, this face should be true to 100 thousandths. If that face run out is larger than that, the seal faces could wobble and it could reduce your seal life. So keep that in mind. You might see that again. So here we are checking the face run out, where we're actually rotating, mounting the dial indicator to the shaft sleeve, and we're rotating it right around the seal face. And that's this area right in here. So having said that, we're going to start getting into installation of a non-cartridge component seal. So what I had mentioned earlier is we're going to do 2 seals today. We're going to do a non-cartridge component type seal, which has, exactly like the name says, components. We have a seal gland. We have the mating ring. We have our seal gland gasket, and we have our rotating or face primary. So over here we have our cartridge seal, which we'll do second, but you can see it's just one piece. So we'll let you guess later which one's easier to do. So first thing we want to do is let's get our pump apart. This is a back pull-out design, and be nice and easy to get this thing apart, because I already undid some of the bolts. And before we pull this out completely, in order to do this seal installation, we need to make a scribe mark on the shaft sleeve here. So there is a reference setting, which we will get into in a little bit, that is in the seal drawing, and we'll get more detail of that, but everything on a component seal is off a reference mark, which is based upon where this seal face is. So since we have a stainless steel shaft sleeve, we're going to make a little mark here with Sharpie on our shaft sleeve, so that we can scribe it and we know exactly where the seal face is on the shaft sleeve. So I'm going to mark this and make sure I get it good. All right. And then I have a nice little flat straight edge here, and I'm going to put this right down here through here and hold that right up against the shaft, nice and flat. And when I rotate this, I'm going to scratch and make a scribe mark right on that black Sharpie marker. So I think I got that pretty good. So now we can start disassembling our pump, now that we have our scribe mark. Once we pull it apart, then we're not going to be able to make that scribe mark very easily. So there it is. In the PowerPoint, we made that scribe mark right in here. So we are good to go. So on a non-cartridge installation, actually with any seal installation, you always get a seal drawing. So this is what a seal drawing looks like. And it has a reference mark or a reference set point. So important thing, see that in yellow down there? A seal drawing comes with every seal. It details everything out so that you know the clearances, so you know whether your seal is going to fit here into this pump. So for this particular pump or seal, we have a 1/16 of an inch installation reference mark. So that is telling me where this primary ring will go onto the shaft sleeve. So it's very important, and that's why we made that shaft mark. So if you look at this, the seal face mark, it's right there at number 12, going down there. That's the front of that seal face. So we had to make that mark exactly on the shaft sleeve where that number 12 arrow is going to. And then we want to set our seal, the back of this seal, on the shaft sleeve when we pull everything apart, exactly 1/16 of an inch away from there. So I'm going to move some stuff out of the way here, and I believe I got all the bolts out. Yep, -1. And we're going to pull this guy apart. So, all right. So this particular pump, this is a Goulds 3196 ANSI pump, and just for information, the seals that we're putting today in are both John Crane seals. So they were nice enough to provide us this stuff for this training session. So we have the back pullout out. We have to get our impeller off. So one of the things, actually, the last course I taught, somebody asked, boy, it's a pain sometimes to get the impellers off. Do you have any tips? A lot of times you just have to kind of, brunt force to get the impellers off, especially if it's an old one. If it's one that's bolted and keyed onto the shaft, sometimes you might need to use wedges once you get the bolt out, and use wedges behind the impeller to slowly put it off. I know some people on this particular pump, this is an open impeller with vanes, you can see. And somebody said, well, can't you put a screwdriver in here and kind of wedge that to get this impeller off? And yeah, I wouldn't necessarily do it because you can break a vane tip. But the easiest thing for us to do is with this particular pump, since it's threaded on and this is rotational, we have a nice little tool here that we use. It's a big breaker bar, and we put this onto the shaft here. And when I slam this nice and hard, that impeller is going to come spinning right off. Look at that. So now it wasn't super tight on there, but having said that, still this is a good way. Slam this thing a couple times, and for this particular pump, it works great for getting the impeller off. So once we get this impeller off, I'm going to show you one quick thing. So this impeller has an O-ring on it, which seals the shaft and keeps liquid from going up the shaft. So this has a tiny little O-ring in here. That should be replaced every time on this particular pump. So you really need to look at your manufacturer for pump, for the pump, to see if there's anything needed when you take your impeller off to go get your seal on. So one other thing, this particular pump, this does have a little space in here, and I've heard some people, say, oh, well, we could heat it to help try and get it off. This particular pump, don't do that. There's a little air pocket in here that can heat up, and this thing can pop and explode. So we don't want to do that on this particular pump. We just want to spin this thing off. Strap wrench sometimes works, trying to get this off and wrap the strap wrench around it. So, all right, so now we have our impeller off. Now we need to take our stuffing box housing out of here. So this is our stuffing box. There's 2 bolts that hold it on, and we're going to start removing this out of here. And then we can get to our shaft sleeve. So very carefully, once the 2 bolts are off, and we can lift this out of the way. So, tell you what, now that I have the stuffing box out of here, we're going to take a quick pause here. Let's throw out here another poll question, and if you can answer that, that would be great. How are we doing on responses?
100%.
100%. Awesome. This group is doing great. So we'll slide our shaft sleeve here right off. So I can come down here and I can show you my nice scribe mark that I made. Right there. So towards the impeller side, I have my scribe mark, which in this case, the scribe mark on here, we want to go 1/16 of an inch towards the impeller. So if you remember, our shaft sleeve was installed like this, the impeller's over here. So I'm going to go 1/16 of an inch that way to set our seal. And that will be the back side of the seal. So what I'll do here is I'll come up here, nice flat spot. And I have my tool, and unfortunately I got to take my glasses off to see this. And we're going to measure 1/16 of an inch, and I'm going to make another scribe mark. So it may be hard for you to see, but I can see it, but I made a second scribe mark here, and that's where the back of the seal is going to get set. So we're going to set that aside for 1 second. Let me just jump ahead. So there's my second scribe mark, and that scribe mark is towards the impeller end, towards the impeller. So now we want to start installing the cartridge, or the component seal, sorry.
We have a question.
We have a question. So
Where did you get the wrench that goes on the key shaft? Is it homemade?
So yes, and we'll zoom in on it. If you can see this here, this is a homemade wrench. We actually make these in bulk specifically for, because we're one of the largest distributors of Goulds pumps in the area, in the Northeast. And so we made these wrenches because we're working these pumps all the time. So this wrench is made by one of our machinists down in our Baltimore shop. And we can buy, if you're interested in getting one of these, this one, we can do them for different shaft sizes, depending on what your pump is. But we can certainly think we sell these for a couple $100. So this thing is pretty heavy, cool steel here. So very nice to have, nice tool if you have a spin-on impeller. So thank you for the question. So first thing we want to do, moving on, we want to install the seal onto the shaft sleeve. So again, we're going to go in one direction here, and we have a reference mark. So first thing before even trying to put this on is let's make sure there are set screws on here. Let's make sure that these are all loose so that we can get this unit on. So one of the things that I'll mention several times here, and another important thing, is that we should keep these seal faces clean. So especially if you're working in a dirty environment, we'll want to clean these faces after install onto the pump. So, important thing to do. When we're putting this on, we want to lubricate the O-ring. So this has an O-ring that's sealing up against the shaft. So right down in here, we have a little bit of a O-ring there. We want to get some lubricant. So very important, the lubricant should be compatible with the fluid that you're pumping. So I think almost everybody here works in the water wastewater market, so you certainly don't want something that's not compatible to be to contaminate the water. So something that's, you know, food grade or the like would probably be good, some kind of lubricant just to help that O-ring slide onto the shaft here. So go ahead and we're going to slide this without touching the seal face, and we slid it on. And now we want to set the back end of this right to that scribe mark. So I have that right on my scribe mark, and I want to go ahead and start tightening this unit down. So, and we want to tighten this evenly. So we don't want to distort anything, the shaft sleeve, or have this thing off center. So lightly tighten it this side, go the opposite. There are 4 set screws to set this in place. So we want to make sure that this goes on here nice and evenly. We don't want this thing wobbling. So once we get this tight here, then we can go and, again, we don't want to over torque these when we're tightening these down, but we want to make them sure they're nice and snug. So now that I got them all nice, looks nice and centered, I can tighten that side. Real good. Okay. All right, so we're nice and tight. So put that aside for a second, and we need to pull up our, to the reference mark. We need to start putting our mating ring into our seal gland. So here's our seal gland, and here's our mating ring. So again, same thing. This has a O-ring, so we want to get our lubricant here. And put that on the outside of the seal so we can slide this in. Now, this one in particular, and we'll zoom on this, this has little notches in the back of it. So some seal glands will have pins in here, and they're anti-rotation pins. This one does not, but if you have a gland that has anti-rotation pins, you'll want to make sure that when you put this mating ring into your seal gland, that those little notches match up to your anti-rotation pins. So slide that in, and this is the part where you're definitely going to get your fingers on here as you're trying to push this in. Unfortunately, if you can use rubber gloves, that's good, but you still will want to clean everything prior to installation. So just make sure that this thing's all the way down and snug. There we go. Throw it in here. So here our mating ring is installed, and it's snug right up against the back of the seal gland. So, and so we want to slide this seal gland now up onto the shaft very carefully, and you want to make sure it doesn't slop around too much. And now the second thing would be, when want to slide our shaft sleeve with the rotating ring on and set that very carefully right inside there. Push it all the way up on the top. So we got that in there. So everything's, try not to bump the seal faces. Actually, I forgot to do one very important thing, so I'm going to pull this back apart again. And we had mentioned this, cleaning the seal faces. So since I got my fingers all over it, we want to clean this. So we can clean it with denatured alcohol. So I have some little alcohol pads. I'm going to go ahead and clean this, get this all cleaned up. Just wipe it real good, and we'll do the same here on this unit. And can't forget to grab my gasket. Put our gasket on here. Slide that up there. Now we'll go back and slide our shaft carefully up and slide. All right, so we're all set here. One note to make, this seal gland happens to have a flush on it. So if you have flushed water going to your seal, some have them, some don't. Not always necessary. So if you're wondering if you need flushed water to your seal, really you need to ask your seal supplier and say, okay, hey, or the seal manufacturer, this is what I'm pumping. This is what style pump. Do I need a flush, or should I have a flush? Obviously, flush gives you the longest life, but in some applications, it's not always necessary. So now that we have that all set up in here, we can take our gland nuts off and slide our stuffing box back into the pump. I'm going to give myself a little bit more room here. This stuffing box in particular also has a flush. This, once it would be fully assembled, we would put a plug in here, but this, you would want to make sure it's facing towards the top so that you could install that flush water if your stuffing box needed to be flushed also. So very carefully, we're going to hold everything, and this is a little bit of a challenge. So if you have somebody helping you, it's always good. But very carefully, make sure gasket stays in, and there we go. All right, all slid in. All right, so, and the gasket's on, so now we want to go ahead and put our gland bolts back on, hold everything in place. One gland bolt. All right, and then we're going to want to tighten that up so to make sure that this stuffing box is nice and snug so that when we go to put everything back together. So let's jump ahead there. All right, so now we're at the point where, all right, the seal's on back here, but we don't want to put the bolts back on here yet because we want to make sure that the shaft sleeve is in place. Now remember, we talked about earlier that this impeller holds the sleeve in place. There you may have a shaft sleeve that's held in place with set screws, so you want to make sure that that's in the right location, but with this one, this gasket and the impeller up against it pushes the shaft sleeve into the right location. So before we go back here to put the bolts on to the seal gland, we want to go ahead and get our impeller on and get that nice and tight. So we're going to spin this on. And there's this guy. And And since this is a threaded on, if I go the opposite direction, this will tighten it. All right, so that's tight. So we have our seal in, but we still don't have the seal gland bolted down. So this is the last piece. Now this one's a little tough, just because of the trying to get my big fingers in here, but we will now proceed to put the gland bolts on and tighten the gland down. And the gland will get tightened down. Remember, it had a gasket on it, so that shouldn't be leaking, or or helps set your thing. So we want to make sure that we snug this down, but not too tight. And we want to make sure that we screw it on, tighten it down evenly. So just like we did with the mechanical seal, rotating face, alternating, tightening it down. We want to make sure that we pull up on this evenly. So I'm going to do them by hand first, make sure they're all snug, and then we'll go and we'll tighten them down. Okay, so now here. Almost there. So keep tightening it until we're nice and snug. Right, that one. So I will mention one of the things, once we fully assemble a pump, at least in our shop, part of our standard practice is if we would assemble a pump in our shop and put a seal in it, we pressure test the seal after it's all done. So we'll reassemble the pump, put it back into the casing, and we'll actually seal off this end and seal off the top and put a pressure gauge on it and put air on it. And we'll let it sit. Usually the guys try to set it up so that it's sealed. They put air on it and let it sit overnight. So when they're wrapping up for the day, they'll put the air on it and it will sit overnight. And it's a good way to determine if our seal is leaking or not, if we installed it properly. So this is the thing, you may not always have that advantage to do that, but if you can, that's always a good thing. So, just about there. So important to remember that reference line. So you want to be able to make that, because that sets everything on here, that reference line. So make sure that if you get a component seal, you get a drawing that has a reference line on that, so that you know where to set that seal face in relation to the stuffing box. All right, so we're all tight and we're still spinning freely. So this seal is now fully on. If we wanted to add our flush water line, we could pull this out now and add it in here if we were adding flush. So a lot of work to put in the component seal, especially if you're rebuilding the pump. You're going to have to pull the pump apart, rebuild it, and then you're going to have to put the seal on once it's rebuilt and set all your clearances. Actually, you're going to have to build the pump first and set all your clearances. So this head clearance was already set on this pump. So I know I didn't have to shift anything. This is how you set the end clearance of the impeller in the face. So if you have wear rings on your pump, or you have to set the end clearance of the impeller up against the casing, that becomes kind of problematic because you got to build the pump first, rebuild it, put it all together without the seal in it, and set all those clearances first before you can start installing your seal. So we kind of bypassed all that just to get the seal in a timely fashion, and so we're not here for 3 hours. So this is a shortened version of our original course where we actually did all that and checked the run out and everything else. Unfortunately, with the COVID stuff going on, we just can't do that. So we're at the point where we're ready to install this into the casing, but I'm not going to do that here today, just because the seal's in. We could reassemble the pump, but I can pull it back apart and do a second seal. So right now, we're going to take a pause here and we'll do another poll question while I start pulling this other seal apart. So if anybody has any questions, feel free to log in and post a question if they have any questions on the component seal. So we're pausing here while you guys answer your poll questions. And I'm starting to pull this seal back apart. How we doing? All right, almost there. Probably waiting on one or two others. How we look?
100%.
All right. So you can put the video back on while I get these gland bolts out. So we are done the hard one. Thank God. Takes a while, but like I said, the component seal can be a challenge, and you mess up making the scribe mark or do something wrong, you can really be in trouble having to pull the pump back apart, and reset everything and make sure everything's done. So very shortly in a second, we're going to get to, so I can get these last couple of bolts out, get this thing apart, and we'll do the cartridge seal. One more bolt here. So while I'm doing this, I will mention one other thing. So I did send everybody an email, and that email had a link in it, and that link had the test. So at the end of all this, if everybody, whoever's taking it for credit, it's a Microsoft form test. You just go in there, it's 6 questions, everything I talked about in, all the questions relate to something that I talked about here during the presentation. So at the end of it, if you're doing it for credit, fill out the form again and submit that within a couple of days. I'd like to have it back within 2 days of completing the seminar. So you can send that back to me and we can get you credit for DEP. And if we run into any issues, I'll certainly have your email. We can email back and forth. So let's get this impeller back off. And again, don't expect any spun-on impeller to come off that easy with this thing's been together and apart so many times, and this gasket's worn out. But again, this is our training pump, so I'm not too worried about it right now. So it makes my life a lot easier. So we got to get this component seal out of here. Let's take the stuffing box out. So we're about 45 minutes in, and on the shortened version, it probably took us about 30 minutes to put that, 25, 30 minutes to put that component seal in. And I didn't even do any of the run out checks or any of that kind of stuff. We just kind of assumed that this thing was good to go. So get the stuffing box off. There we go. And room. Okay, so get our gasket out and shaft sleeve out, and get our component out there. So the last thing I have to do is take this the 81T out of here. So we'll loosen up these nuts, set screws, and we should be good to go and ready to start installing our cartridge seal. Okay, shaft sleeve out, and I'm going to put it up here. So let's talk about the cartridge seal. So cartridge seal, a little different, all one unit. What's holding this whole thing together are these set screws. So when we start putting this together, you have these set screws here that are pretty much holding the whole thing in place. There are clips, I should say clips. These clips hold everything together. And then once we put our set screws onto the shaft sleeve and get this thing set in place, then we can, and everything assembled, we can take our set screws here out. But we have an exploded view in the PowerPoint right now up of the cartridge seal.
Question, is there not a specific torque for the bolts you're working on now?
Can you be a little more specific on the bolts? Is it the bolts for the stuffing box or the set screws?
It was the ones, I think for the stuffing box.
For the stuffing box, there will be specific torque settings in the O&M manual for your pump. For this one in particular, I don't remember what they are, just because we're assembling, disassembling this pump. I wasn't really concerned with that, but your O&M manual for your pump should have specific torque settings to set the stuffing box in place, and even putting the casing back into the pump volute. And then as far as the set screws, torque setting, we want to put them in pretty tight, close enough. We don't want to egg-shape the shaft sleeve, but we do want to make it pretty snug so that that thing doesn't come loose, any of these set screws, once we're putting that on.
So hand tightening.
Maybe hand tighten, more than hand tight, but pretty snug. These set screws do have little dimples in them, or points on them, so they do kind of dig into the shaft sleeve. So if we put them in pretty tight, they should stay in there pretty good. So there may be specific, depending on your seal manufacturer, they may recommend a specific torque setting. So in order to start putting this guy in, the cartridge, we're going to jump ahead here and we're going to put our shaft sleeve on. And we don't need to do anything with the shaft sleeve. Some of these come with the shaft sleeve. Hey, look what came up. Here's our cartridge seal, and there's the drawing for it. A seal drawing comes with every seal, so it's coming with this unit and even the component seal. So we have our pump disassembled, and if we have a shaft sleeve separate from coming with the cartridge seal, we want to install that also. So we have the separate shaft sleeve that is with this pump, and we want to begin installing that. So same thing as we talked about before is inside here, there's an O-ring. So right down in here, there's an O-ring. So we want to lubricate that O-ring. So again, lubricant needs to be compatible with the fluid that you're pumping. So for example, we sell some pumps that go into gasoline service on our industrial side. So certainly we want to have a lubricant that's compatible with any petroleum products for that type of stuff. For you guys, almost everybody here is water, wastewater, so we probably want a food grade grease to put on there so that we can slide this on. So we lubed our O-ring, and we can slide this cartridge right up onto the shaft sleeve right now. And we want to push it all the way here, all the way up, not completely off the shaft sleeve, but we want to push it all the way up to the very end of the shaft sleeve. So lubricate. So now, this is the tough part because everything's already on here and kind of locked, not locked in place yet, but pretty darn close. We want to carefully, and we're going to have to line up bolt holes, and as best we can, slide everything right in there. Install our stuffing box bolts to hold everything in place. Notice one thing, I didn't have to measure anything. I didn't have to make a scribe mark. That's a plus. So we have our seal in here. It's not bolted down yet, but it's on the shaft sleeve, so we're cruising along here pretty good. So, you know what I forgot, and it's a good thing I looked. We're going to pull this back apart again. I forgot one very important thing, which would not be good, so I'm going to go ahead and do this again real quick. Fortunately, it's my component, my cartridge seal. I forgot to put my gasket on. It's sitting right here. Pull that off. Slide our gasket on, and then very carefully slide that back on. All right. Never fails. Every time we do this, I always take your time. I'm rushing to make sure that we can all get out of here at 12 o'clock and go before lunch. So, take down our stuffing box. All right. One of the things I should have mentioned, but we have our ports for our seal for flush. Depending on where your water lines are coming in, you want to adjust the seal accordingly so that you can have them easily attached to your water lines if you're using a flush water. So now we get to put in these gland bolts again. So probably the hardest, most time-consuming part is just trying to, on these small pumps, trying to get our gland bolts in there. So there's one. And again, just like we did on the component seal, once we get these on here, we want to tighten these down evenly. And notice one thing I didn't have to do, I didn't have to put my impeller on at this point. I will, but at least to get up to this point, I didn't have to put the impeller on. So that's not a bad thing because nothing's attached currently to the shaft. The seal's just right now sitting on the shaft sleeve. So before we tighten that down, we're going to put our impeller on to make sure everything's in place since this thing's holding on here. So slide this on. And we'll go and we'll tighten it. Okay, now we can tighten our gland bolts, which is always a challenge. Well, again, we want to rotate, not do side by side. We tighten up a couple to this side. Here. And the last one. Now remember, we do have a gasket, so on these seal glands all have gaskets, so we don't need to torque down on these. We just need to get them tight so that they hold. And there's that one. There's one. All right. So got that done. I already installed the impeller, but we can do that either way. We just wanted to make sure that the shaft sleeve was all the way up. So we can install the new case gasket. So this is what's going to be a little difficult here in this case. So we're all bolted up, but we still haven't done one important thing, and that's tighten everything down onto the shaft. So we may not do this since this is always a challenge to get this on. So we're not going to worry about that now. We're going to pull this back out. This gasket has seen better days since it's the training pump. We're not going to worry about putting this back in. So normally what we would do is put this up into the casing, make sure that nothing's, that the impeller's okay and it's not touching the casing. But in this case, we checked this pump out before. We're confident that it's not going to be touching the casing. We don't need to make any adjustments. But if you did need to make adjustments before the seal gets locked onto the shaft, you would want to make your adjustments. So that's the one nice thing, since this is not locked onto the shaft, the sleeve inside this cartridge seal, we can make impeller adjustments and move this in and out without any issues, as long as it's not locked onto the shaft yet. So, assuming we have this all together, now we can go back and if you can see, I'm rotating this, but nothing's moving on the seal. You're going to have a rotating sleeve in there. So what we want to do is now we need to start locking on the set screws for the seal. And just like the other unit, we're going to do one side at a time. These are a little bit of a challenge just from the location. All right. Two opposite ones done. We'll go to this one. All right. Now that we're got them on there pretty good, now we can tighten them down real good. So I'm not wrenching these on, but I'm going pretty tight. So we don't want that whole sleeve's going to rotate. That ring's going to rotate with the shaft. So we don't want it coming off. Again, the set screws have little points on them, so they'll dig into the shaft sleeve a little bit, but you still want to make sure that this is nice and snug. All right, so we're almost done here. That's tightened down. And now we can remove the setting spacers. So these are these little clips, and that's holding everything together. So now once we take these off, since everything's locked in place, our seal is already preloaded at the right dimensions, setting dimensions, so that this thing can properly seal your fluid in there. So we didn't have to do a scribe mark. These setting clips set everything. So when we sell a pump and we have a seal, in case you guys need to take the pump back apart for some reason, we always send the setting clips along with you in a baggie if you have a seal already pre-installed from us at the factory. So this is the last setting clip. So this is important. This is the last thing you do once everything's locked in place and set. You take these clips off. So this last one's going to be a little bit tough. We may be able to rotate the shaft a little bit. And let's see if we can do that. To get that last one. This last clip out. And we are out. So 4 clips out. And now, if I were to rotate this, this is going to rotate nice and freely on there. Your seal's set properly to the correct depth and everything, all as a cartridge. So that's the last thing you want to do is those clips, and we have our cartridge seal installed. So we already tightened the set scholars, removed the setting spacers. Last thing you do. So important question. Removing the setting spacers, that's these guys right here. That's the last thing you do when you're installing this. So we are completely done with this. Now we can put it back into our casing. Again, if we wanted to check end clearance, you wouldn't put the set screws for the seal into the shaft sleeve or take those clips off until you did all that. So cartridge seal makes everything super easy. So let's post another poll question here. I think it's the last one. And then we can open up for anything else. So last poll question coming up. So hopefully we're right about 12:05. So looks like we just about got everybody. So we can end the poll. So right now, we're done with this installation. This can go back in. So now I'll open it up. I'll stay here for a couple minutes to answer any questions. If you want to post any questions, feel free to do so. We can unmute people, whatever you like. If you wanted to post in the question, can you unmute so I can ask you a question? If you don't want to type it in, let me know. But we're complete for now. People that are doing this for DEP credit, there is a test. So I had sent you a link. If you did not get it, send me an email and I will resend you the link. But it was a link with the PowerPoint. It came from me. It did not come from the GoToWebinar. It came direct from me, A. Grieve at Geiger Inc. So go in. It's 6 or 8 questions. Everything was, I sent the PDF of the presentation along with it. And so that has, if you read through it, all the answers, all the questions have been answered within the presentation. So if you forget something, go back and look at the presentation. I'm sure everybody can figure out what the answers are. So if you have any questions, feel free to post them. I'll stay online for another minute or two. And if you don't have any questions, feel free to log out. And I appreciate your attendance. Moving forward, if you have any seal installations that you would like us to come and look at, we'd be more than happy to come out, and especially tough sealing applications. If you have something that you just can't get the pump sealed, we'd love to come out and help you try and solve the problem for you. We have a good bunch of engineers here, including myself, and resources at John Crane that we can come out and help you figure out your problems and hopefully solve them for you. We always like a good challenge. So thank you for your attendance, and if you don't have any other questions posted, thanks, and we'll see you next time. I'll probably be doing this one more time, and then we'll be moving on to a different type of webinar as we're still going to be stuck in this COVID, I think, for a little bit longer, where we won't be able to do things hands-on in person. So thank you, and have a great day.